Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Finster, your feline guide to a really basic classical music library. Right, honey? Yes, of course. And today we are talking about, this is the third in our series. And if you've been following this, and I just want to say straight off, right from the beginning here, that the fact that I'm doing these rather quickly, if you're following this as they come out, rather than in the year 2762 or whatever it is. It's to build up a library of videos that you can watch at your leisure. You don't have to do them all at once. In fact, part of the whole point of this exercise is that you should take your time and get to know each work really, really well, so that you've internalized it and you can relate it to the other things in this series. And then it doesn't matter how long it takes. There's no rush. There's no rush whatsoever. But the first two works that we've talked about, Beethoven's Fifth and Brahms' First, were both symphonies, and they both followed a certain emotional trajectory, that of tragedy to triumph. And a whole sort of series of emotional moods and different scenarios along the way, because each composer had their own way of getting from tragedy to triumph. Although both had a basic formula: start with something really turbulent and really intense emotionally, then relax a little bit, go back a little bit, take in some more peaceful moods, more playful moods, and then have a finale which rams home the victorious conclusion. So we're going to do another symphony in that style. All of them have as their model Beethoven's Fifth, which was the original iconic tragedy to triumph symphony. Brahms' First does it, and so does Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony in F minor. Oh, this is a great piece, and it's so much fun. And it's very, very different sounding from Beethoven and from Brahms, although it dates from almost exactly the same time as Brahms' First Symphony. It's really, really interesting what was going on in the world of music, this period in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. In that period, it was a wonderful time if you like tragedy to triumph, because it was the high point of the Romantic era, when composers were these suffering, striving, self-absorbed, narcissistic, people who imagine themselves as the artist hero, overcoming the indifference of the public, their personal struggles, the nastiness of life. All of that stuff was going on. And so it's all embodied in their music. Now, like the other two symphonies that we talked about, Tchaikovsky's Fourth begins with a really powerful statement. In Beethoven's Fifth, it's ta-ta-ta-ta, we know that, right? And Beethoven, accidentally made the comment that rhythm represented fate. And so the symphony was a striving to overcome fate. Well, whether it is or whether it isn't, it's going to be sort of up to you when you listen to it. But that fate idea really caught on. Brahms didn't buy it. Brahms was not into fate particularly. He was maybe a little bit in his Fourth Symphony, which we may get to later in this series. But the First Symphony has its own business to mind, its own tragedy to triumph trajectory, which doesn't involve this idea of this thing that you have to get over. It gets over the emotion of despair or turbulence or anguish in the first movement in a different series of vignettes, if you want to call them that, or different emotional states. Tchaikovsky, on the other hand, went for the fate thing, hook, line, and sinker. This is the Fate Symphony. It really is. It begins with a fanfare. Da 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 ba ba da 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 ba ba da ba da 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 da, and that is Fate, and it's a big long Fate. Beethoven's Fate was a short little tiny Fate. It's a da 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 Fate. Tchaikovsky's is a whole Megillah. It's a whole, Fate is like really heavy duty serious, And there's a real question as to whether or not you ever really overcome it. Maybe you don't. I mean, that's something you'll decide for yourself when you listen to the music. But this symphony is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, for the conflict between that opening fanfare and the ensuing music in the first movement, which is very long. It's a big, long sucker. It's like 18 minutes long of solid, continuous music. I mean, think about that for a minute. That's a major undertaking. And it's full of beautiful, beautiful, captivating melody, because that was Tchaikovsky's thing. It really was. So you look at the first movement, you don't have to worry about form per se. You will always recognize that fanfare when it comes back, and it interrupts the flow of the music at various points, and creates a huge tragic climax about 2/3 of the way through, and has the last word at the very end. So the point of that first movement, and the thing you need to keep in mind, is that nothing is resolved. It lays out a formula. It lays out a state of being in which there you rail against impersonal and impassive fate, which comes back regularly to, mess you up. I mean, that's basically the idea of the first movement. Now, the second movement of this symphony is a very beautiful song, Melancholy. And it begins with an absolutely exquisite solo oboe, and it has beautiful, beautiful tunes, and it rises to a climax in the middle section that's somewhat more hopeful, and then sinks back down into the wistful, I think is a nice word for it, wistful opening. The third movement is one of the most famous and iconic works in the entire repertoire. Tchaikovsky had the idea to separate the orchestra into sections. There's the strings, the woodwinds, and the brass. Each has its own kind of music. Now, this is a scherzo, or joke, which they say, which was related to the dance movement, the minuet, back in the 18th century. And that means, generally speaking, a light, quick movement. But it's light and it is quick, but it's really unbelievably, characterful. It really is, because in the outer sections you have only the strings, and Tchaikovsky has those strings playing pizzicato entirely for the whole movement. Plunk, plunk, plunk. In fact, you'll see it if you ever see it performed. Most string players, they won't even they'll hold their instruments almost like guitars sometimes when they play this music, because they're just strumming most of the time. It's really amazing sounding, absolutely phenomenal, and it caused a bit of a sensation when it first came out. I mean, no one had ever done anything like that quite before for such an extended period of time. And that's one of the aspects of romantic music generally, which is that it latches onto something and then really rams it home through repetition or dwells on it for a long period of time. So this texture persists for a couple of minutes. Then the middle section begins. The woodwinds come in with their own kind of a gawky, strange, clumsy, comical tune almost. Then the brass and timpani, by the way, underneath the brass, come in with a march. Jump, bum, 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 like that. And it mixes with the woodwind tune, and eventually the string pizzicato comes back, and at the climax of the string pizzicato thing, all the woodwinds and the brass come in. I mean, the whole orchestra finally gets reassembled, let's put it that way, in the final bars before it vanishes with a blip, 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 plink. And that's that. Now, the finale, Tchaikovsky told us what the finale is. Tchaikovsky said the finale represents the fact that if you can't be happy, and Tchaikovsky was seldom happy, if you can't be happy, go to the people, go to the crowd, lose yourself in popular rejoicing. And so that's what he tries to do in this movement. And he tries very, very hard. He adds to the orchestra percussion, thank God, cymbals, triangle, and bass drum. Yay, because that was my thing when I was playing in orchestras. And it's almost vulgar, the music. I mean, some people think it is, actually. I think it's just marvelously exciting. And it's all full of swirling scales and brass fanfares and all that stuff. However, towards the end of it, fate comes back. And the thing about fate, of course, is that fate is immutable. In other words, fate doesn't change. Fate is always just fatalistic. So it comes back in its most scary form yet. And it does exactly what Tchaikovsky says it does. It's wonderful when the music does exactly what the composer says it does. It just ignores it and goes on to the happy ending, leaving fate to be fate. And there's a real question then. Is this truly a triumph? Is it a happy ending? Or is it a equivocal ending? That's the interesting thing. And that's something that every listener decides for themselves. And so each composer, as you've seen in these 3 videos, had their own view of the tragedy to triumph finale. Each one is different, and each one is personal. And that's what makes these pieces so extraordinary. And that's what makes listening to these iconic works so much fun, because they're so different from each other, and yet they're part of a tradition. They're part of a philosophical or aesthetic outlook that is shared. And so you can use one as a springboard to the other. I mean, you could do it forward, you could do it backwards. It doesn't make any difference how you decide to do it. Now, I do have a little story about this finale, though, because it's so much fun. It uses, as I mentioned, some hefty percussion. And I was a cymbal player in the performance of this in my little community orchestra. And oh my goodness, that was such a good time. But in the end, the cymbals and bass drum and treadle really go nuts. It's really, really complicated. There's just a lot of playing. It's cha-cha-cha, 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 cha-cha-cha. It's getting faster and faster and louder and louder. And I was wearing my concert blacks with my fabulous tux. And each time I whacked the cymbal, one of my shirt studs was popping out. Apparently, they were flying all over the stage into the tuba, and God knows where they wound up. And at the end, I had my last triumphant crash like this with my arms spread wide, and I was completely bare-chested. Totally. I got one hell of an ovation. The conductor, who had a very good sense of humor, asked me to take a solo bow at the end. It was quite special. And it's a very special symphony. And for that reason, it's always been near and dear to my heart. And I hope that you'll take some time to get to know it and enjoy it as well. And I also want to say, when you're listening, that big first movement, that 18 minutes, if that's too much, start with the ending. You don't have to take it in order. Eventually you will. Eventually you'll get the whole piece in the order in which the composer intended. Start with that amazing scherzo for pizzicato strings. Get to know some of the beauties that you'll encounter along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with it at all. You don't have to start at point A and end up at point D or whatever you're going to wind up, Listen to the parts that grab you immediately and then work your way into the rest, if that's the way you want to do it. Some people always want to start at the beginning and listen all the way through to the end, but others will take it differently. Don't be afraid to skip around. It's your music. You can do whatever you damn well please with it, and whatever you need to do to give it, to give yourself the maximum opportunity to enjoy all of the things that it has to offer. It's always a time thing. I keep coming back to this, and I can't stress it enough. And you have to decide how you want to spend your time and what's going to give you the best bang for your buck. And this symphony has lots of bangs and lots of bucks, and you can encounter them anywhere you want, in any order you please, and for however much time you may have. Maybe you only have 10 minutes. You want to hear some music, play the finale, play the scherzo, listen to the slow movement. If you want to relax, if you want something lyrical, And you'll find, I think, that you'll have a certain agency, a certain, authority over the music, which is a very nice thing to have. A lot of people, when they come to classical music, tend to feel, oh, well, it's, I have to do it this way, or that way is not right, or it's fragile and it can only be done in a certain respect. It's nonsense. It's all about what gives you the most pleasure. And the pleasure's there to be had. You discover it for yourself in whatever way works best. Right, Finster? Yeah, you agree? Of course she does. So there you have it. Enjoy Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, and let me know what you think. Please feel free to comment if you don't know it, or if you do. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.